Good morning and welcome to Bridgewood Online. I'm Pastor Sean, and as always, it is great to have each and every one of you here with us this morning. Let me say this first and foremost, that if you missed last week's message, if you missed part one of Anxious for Nothing, you need to go back and you need to listen to that message. There were amazing truths in that message that all of us need to just let that get rooted in our hearts. If you weren't able to be with us live here in person, let me just say that you missed an amazing time in God's presence as He just began to break off anxiety, stress, and worry out of people's lives. So let me encourage you. Go online right now to bridgewoodchurch.com/info and register for an experience at one of our locations. You won't regret it. You can also find all of the information right there for our Easter weekend experiences, times, locations, and everything that's right there for you in your family. So this morning, Pastor Kurt Demoff, our lead pastor, is going to be bringing us part two of his message series, Anxious for Nothing. Would you welcome Pastor Kurt to the platform?
Again, I want to welcome you today. Want to welcome those that are watching online, whatever campus or location you are watching from. It's great to have you with us. And I want to just invite you once again, all right? We're really close to celebrating Easter 2021, and I want to make sure that you reserve your seat, okay? So Easter Sunday, we have 3 experiences for you to join with us. And we really need you to register. We really do. And you can go to bridgewoodchurch.com and you can register for your seat. We have a 9 o'clock experience going on at our Goodrich location. And then we have 2 experiences at our Clarkston campus at 10:15 and 11:30. And so we want to fill those up. And if we get all those filled up, then we will open up another option. And the reason we really need you to register is because we're still dealing with those restrictions. We know that people come on Easter, they're going to come, and so we want you to invite them, and we want to make sure that we're prepared for them. So it's going to be an amazing time together. Anybody ready to celebrate this year? I think this weekend gets us really excited about the spring and all that is coming our way, and so we can kind of lean into it. All right, here we go. We're in part 2 of a short message series that we kicked off last week called Anxious for Nothing. And I really want you to lean in to this today because I really believe that the Lord is going to teach us some things that are going to help us in everyday life. I want something that is going to help me in everyday life. I don't want something that just inspires me for a moment, but something that is going to work every day of the week, every day of my life. And I believe that's what we're going to experience today. So let me just say this. If you forget everything that I say, I don't want you to forget this. I want you to remember this. And here's what I want you to remember. That anxiety comes from the things that are happening inside of us and not the things that are happening around us. I want you to get that. I want you to write that down. Anxiety comes from the things that are happening inside of us, not the things that are happening around us. Because sometimes people will deflect their anxiety to people and to circumstances that are happening around them that they can't control. That's why it doesn't work. That's why it's not a good strategy for dealing with anxiety or worry. But rather than deflect, when you direct your anxiety to what's going on inside of you, that's a good strategy because those are the things that you and I can control. We can control what is happening inside of us. And that's why it's a strategy that the Bible teaches us and that the Bible really is wanting us to get a hold of so that we can deal with the anxiety and stresses in life. And so here's what I want to do. As we look inside, I want to look at the leading triggers that happen on the inside of us that trigger anxiety and worry. And I'm going to give them to you right in the beginning, and then I'm going to circle back and we're going to unpack them in just a few moments. But here are the three most common triggers inside of us that cause anxiety and worry. The first is an integrity issue. The second is an imbalance issue. And the third is an indecision issue. Those are the three leading triggers that will always cause anxiety in our lives. And I want to tell you why this is important. I want to tell you up front so you don't tune me out, you don't turn to another channel. I don't want you to just kind of doze off here. Why does this matter for you and for me? I'll tell you why. Because anxiety is robbing us from the real life that God has intended for us. We said last week that anxiety kills reality. And what happens is we get caught in a world of hypotheticals. Have you ever been caught and trapped in your mind in a world of hypotheticals that you're worried and anxious about that most of the time never ever come true? And so it robs us of real life and reality. But here's the good news. The good news is there's an antidote for anxiety. The Bible gives us a proven antidote for anxiety. And I want to just review this real quick with you. So Philippians chapter 4 is where we were last week. So if you have your Bible, your device, why don't you go ahead and get that out. Philippians chapter 4. And here's the antidote for anxiety that we talked about last week. It says this: rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near. The Apostle Paul wrote this while he was in house arrest, in prison, waiting a death sentence over his life. But he says, I want you to rejoice. I want you to find a foundation in your life. I want you to find something inside of you that is not controlled by what's going on around you. That's what he discovered. Rejoice. He found joy. Joy is internal. Happiness is external. Okay, happiness comes and goes depending on what is happening around you. But joy is something deep inside of us that does not need to be controlled by the things around us. And that's what the Apostle Paul discovered here. And he says, I want you to learn this. And then he says this: be anxious about nothing. Now, he's not saying that you're never going to feel or experience anxiety. That's not at all what he's saying. What he's saying is when you feel anxiety or worry, you don't want it to remain in your life. You don't want that to control you. You don't want it to control you to the point where you can't eat or sleep, or you're stressed out all the time, or you're self-medicating, trying to escape the hypotheticals that you're caught in or the issues that you are dealing with in life. And so he's trying to help us to understand that. And then he says, here's what's going to happen in every situation. So whenever you face anxiety, not some of the times, all of the time, in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. So he taught us something here, that when we face anxiety and worry, we need to turn that into prayer. Prayer is just a common space, conversation that we have with God, which is like, God, I'm anxious and I'm worried and I'm bringing this to you. We said, let your request be known to God. That's the passive use of the verb we discovered last week. It's not the active voice, it's the passive voice, which means stop suppressing your anxiety and your worry. Stop trying to push it down in your life. But he's saying here, let it. Notice, you've got to allow it. You've got to let it come up out of you so that you can turn it into a conversation with God rather than eating us up on the inside. And he says, when you do that, here's what's going to happen. It's going to lead you to the pathway of peace. And then he says, watch this. He says there, when we release our anxiety to Jesus, he says, and the peace of God. The peace of God. You'll see it right there in the scripture. It's going to come up for you. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And so I love that there because what he's saying is it's a supernatural peace. It's not a peace that the world gives. It's a supernatural peace. It's a peace that is going to come, and notice what it says. It's going to guard your heart and your mind. How many of you want peace to be a bodyguard in your life? Man, that sounds good to me, like peace is going to watch over your heart and your mind. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to unpack these three triggers that cause anxiety, and we're going to, once again, we're going to apply the antidote to anxiety, and we're going to learn how to fix the anxiety and worry that we're dealing with. And so I want you to say this, there's a fix. All right, if you're watching right now online, I want you to put it right in the comments. There's a fix that we can experience in our life when we're dealing with anxiety and worry, especially when these triggers cause anxiety and worry. So let's look at it again. Integrity issues trigger anxiety. We have to fix our failures. We have to fix our failures. Okay, here's what happens. Integrity issues cause anxiety. It triggers it in our life. And so here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to fix the failures in our life. I want you to go to Psalm chapter 139. I want to show you something. I want to show you a real guy that was going through some real anxiety in his life. He's a psalmist. He was also the king of Israel, David. And in Psalm 139, he is on a rant about everything that's happening around him. Now, I've been known to go on a rant a few times. And he's just like ranting about everything that is going on in his life. In verse number 19, look at what he says. He says, if only you, God, would slay the wicked away from me, those who are bloodthirsty. They speak with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. How many of you know he's stressed out right now? Like he's losing his mind. He's been being pursued by the enemies. He's been on the run in his life, and he's anxious, and he's stressed, and he's ranting about everything that's going on around him that he cannot control. Okay, not a good place to be. But watch the shift that happens in the next verse. Say shift. As you shift in the verse number 23, watch what happens. He says, search me, not search them, search me, God, and know my heart, not their heart, my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Did you see the shift there? It went from everything that's going on around him to directing it now inside of him. And he's not deflecting his anxiety anymore. Okay, he was doing that just a moment ago and it wasn't going well. But now he directs his anxiety. Okay, he turns and he directs his anxiety right where it needs to be, inside of him, because that's what he can control. And so don't deflect your anxiety, direct your anxiety. And so notice what he does. He directs it internally inside of him, and he says, know my anxious thoughts. Know my anxious thoughts. He's going right to his mind, because how many of you know our minds want to try to control everything? Our minds get wrapped up trying to control things that we can't control. And so you can tell his mind is racing, and it's going in this moment. So he turns it inward, and he says, God, test me, search me. Know my anxious thoughts. But not just my anxious thoughts, I want you to check my anxious heart. Because sometimes our heart gets weighed down with the things of life. And we got stuff that is stuffed inside of our hearts that causes anxiety and worry. And he says, is there anything in my heart that is offensive? God, is there anything in my heart that's not right? Because if there is, I can do something about it. I can control that. I can release that to you. And I love that there, because in this moment, he is looking at the thing. He's directing his anxiety exactly where he needs to direct it, which is inside of him. What is going on inside of his life? And so there's a lot of times, I truly believe this. Listen to me, Bridgewood. God wants to give us peace, but he has no place to put it. We're so stuffed, our hearts are so weighed down, our minds are so stressed out that God is wanting to bring that supernatural peace, but he's got nowhere to put it. And so he's saying, I want you to clear some stuff out of your mind. I want you to clear stuff out of your heart. I want you to get out of there so that there's a pathway for my peace to come into your mind and to come into your heart. And so how can we do that? Well, clean hands and a clean heart. And that's what David was saying. David was saying, check me, God, test me. God, is there something inside of me? Listen, people want to have peace in their life, but how many of you know if you've got an integrity issue, if you're not doing the right thing, you're never going to have peace? If you're looking at stuff you shouldn't be looking at, you're not going to have peace. If you're with people that you shouldn't be with, you're not going to have peace. If you're fudging numbers that you shouldn't be fudging, you're going to have anxiety. But isn't it amazing that when you know that you have clean hands and a clean heart and that your life is right before God, that the level of anxiety and stress just totally lowers in your life? Like, you've got nothing to be anxious about because you are who you are and you're walking in the freedom that God has come to bring to us. We say this all the time at Bridgewood: nothing changes until I do. Don't try to change everything else around you, because a lot of times you can't control that. But you can change on the inside. You can control what's going on inside of us. The second is an imbalance issue. It triggers anxiety and worry in our life. And so we've got to fix our foundation. Okay, I touched on this a little bit last week, but I want to come back and I want to unpack some things that I didn't get to show you. And I love what Isaiah 26 says, and I demonstrated this to you while I was on my balance board. Now, I did not bring that back for a reason. A note to self, I put, try the illustrations before you do them live. So if you saw that sweat last Saturday night coming down my forehead, and you know me, I'm not a sweater at all. That was real. That was not planned. I did not practice, and I did not think it was going to be as hard as it was for as long as it was, and to keep talking at the same time. And so you saw that, though, but I love what Isaiah says. Notice what he says: you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, solid, secure. That's what he's saying. Not wishy-washy, not out of balance, but steadfast, strong, and secure. Why? Because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for he is the rock eternal. So we learn that we've got to build our life on Christ the rock. That's the foundation that we have to build our lives on. And a lot of times we get this wrong. So here's again what anxiety is. Anxiety means to be torn in two. It means to be drawn in different directions. So it divides us. So we're here, then we're there, we're thinking here, but we should be thinking here. That's the stress and the anxiety does to us, is it tears us apart and it divides us. And so we've got to realize that, we've got to understand that when we're dealing with anxiety in our lives, because anytime that we do that, we introduce that instability and that insecurity into our foundation. And I demonstrated to you last week that you cannot stand strong when you're on an unstable, insecure foundation. It's never going to work. You're always going to be tense. You're always going to be under pressure. You're always going to be under stress. But when we have the foundation of Christ and we're trusting Him, it helps us to deal with the anxieties of life. Matthew chapter 6. Let's go back there so I can point something out to you. Matthew chapter 6 in verses 25 through 34. In 9 verses, Jesus is in a dialogue about worry and anxiety. Okay, this is found in the midst of Jesus' longest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, which goes 2 chapters, Matthew chapter 5 through Matthew chapter 7. Jesus is teaching, and in one of those episodes or experiences, he specifically dialed in on worry and anxiety. What I want you to note is that in 9 verses, Jesus talks about worry 5 times. In verse number 25, he says, "Do not worry about your life, what you're going to eat, drink, about your body, what you're going to wear. Is your life not more important than food, the body more than clothes?" So Jesus was saying, listen, people are stressed out and worried about just the essentials of life. In verse 27, he asked them a question. Can any of you add an hour to your life by worrying? He's questioning the effectiveness of worry. And he asked the crowd a question. In verse 28, he says once again, why do you worry about clothes? Why do you worry about the stuff that you need? Verse 31, why do you worry again about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, where you're going to live, the decisions that you're going to make? And then in verse 34, he says, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. So the first 4 are present. He says in verse 34, don't even worry about tomorrow because today has enough worries of its own. And so 5 times Jesus is helping us to understand the complexity and the idea of anxiety and worry and what's it going to do in our lives. Now, people often ask me this, and there were people that asked me last week after our experience. It's a great question. What is the difference between worry and a concern? Because I think sometimes people use the word concern to try to camouflage real anxiety and stress. I've been known to do that as well. And so what's the difference? Here's the difference between worry and concern. Worry is something that you're troubled about in your life, but you have a direction and a plan for. Okay, there are things in my life that I'm concerned about, but I know what the solution is. I have a plan, and I'm pursuing that. That's a concern. A worry is something that you're troubled about that wants to control you to the point that you cannot function in everyday life. Eat, sleep, everything's thrown off, your attitude. It affects you to the point where it's controlling you, you're not controlling it. You can control a concern, but you cannot control anxiety and worry. It'll be out of control. And so if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a direction for the thing that's keeping you up, then you're stressing out and you're full of anxiety. That's what it is. But if you know and you say, listen, until I reach the plan or the destination, I'm gonna have some anxiousness and some worry, but it's under control. It's not controlling me. I'm controlling it. So watch what he says in verse 25. This is how Jesus started it all. He said, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. Now, I've taught you this for a lot of years, and I'm hoping that you're going to have the answer so that I can feel good when I leave. Whenever we see the word therefore, we ask ourselves, what's it there for? Good. I'm going to sleep good tonight. The word therefore means that you've got to go back to the verse before, sometimes the verses before, and you've got to understand the bigger context. So when you see therefore, you ask, what's it there for? And go back one verse. Watch this now, because this will be eye-opening for you. Look at verse number 24. That comes right before Jesus 5 times talking to us about worry. He says, no one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Remember what we said anxiety and worry is? It's being torn in two. It's being drawn in 2 different directions. So Jesus just got done talking to them about their foundation. And he said, the reason that you're out of balance is because you're torn in 2 different directions. You don't know who you're serving. You don't know who's controlling what. You're wrapped up over here rather than here, and so your life is unstable. It's insecure. You've got to make up your mind. You've got to choose one or the other. Otherwise, you're going to be under constant anxiety and stress. I cannot tell you that one of the things you and I have to ask ourselves when we're experiencing anxiety and worry is something out of balance in my life. You got to go right to the foundation. And you've got to say, is there an issue that I'm not trusting God with, or am I being divided somehow, some way? And then Jesus said at the end of all that, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. So Jesus says, listen, rather than being torn in 2 different directions, trying to serve 2 different masters, why don't you align yourself to my priority and seek first my kingdom and my righteousness? Here's what kingdom means here. Kingdom means divine rule. That means that God is in control. He says, seek first in your life that God will always be in control. He's in the driving seat. He's got his hands on the wheel. We're not in control. That's what he's saying. And then he says righteousness, which is our divine standard. That means we follow his ways and his word, not ours. So you see, when you align those things and get those things in balance, that it will reduce worry and anxiety and stress out of our lives. But if that's out of balance, it's not going to work. You're never, ever going to be free from it in your life. And so he says, I want you to be free, and I want you to experience. So we got to fix our foundation. And let me end with this one. Okay, this is the one I want to spend some time with as we wrap up. And it's simply this. Indecision triggers anxiety. So we have to fix our focus. Indecision issues in our life will always trigger anxiety and worry. So we have to fix our focus. And I want you to notice something about indecision, because it's really linked to imbalance. These 2 actually fit together like hand in glove. And I want to show you this in James chapter 1. James chapter 1, in verse number 5 through 8. I want you, as I read this text, I want you to listen for imbalance and indecision in this verse. Here's what James says. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. When you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea, blown and tossed about by the wind. The person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do. Do you see imbalance and indecision linked together here? You can see it right there when we're trying to make a decision in our life. It's not only indecision, but it's actually a lot of imbalance as well. You're not only torn in 2, but you're tossed around by every circumstance that is out there. You're not in control. The circumstances are in control. The anxiety is in control. And so here's the question. Why is there's so much indecision in our world today. And let me just give you three. I've listened to a lot of people. I've searched and researched a lot of this online. I think a lot of people will agree and come down to these three. And it's simply this. Number one, there's way too many options out there in our world today. Does anybody get stressed when you've got 25 options, 100 options? They've not only researched this, but they have tested this over and over again. When you give somebody 4 choices rather than 40 choices, they make better decisions. And so we're in a world now where we just love having all of the options that we could imagine. I sat down the other day, the boys loaded a Discovery Plus so that we could watch some things that aren't on regular TV. I got on there, and there's got to be 1,000 choices on there. I was so stressed just looking through there. For an hour, I never even watched anything. I just scrolled. Couldn't make up my mind what I was going to watch. Way too many options. Worried about making a costly mistake. Like everybody in their life gets paralyzed and anxious about making a decision because what if I make the wrong decision? I'm gonna get outside of the will of God and my life's gonna be over at that moment. Or just the lack of decision-making skills. How many of you know decision-making is an art? It's not easy making decisions. And a lot of times we haven't learned how to make decisions and make good decisions in our life. And so we get full of anxiety and worry. And we don't know what to do. And we start to panic. And one of the things that happens often, listen to me, about decision making, is that the anxiety and the worry often comes, listen to me, because we have made the decision about us. When many times the decision really isn't about us. I was making a decision. I make a lot of decisions. It's just the nature of what I do. It's the nature of being a leader these days. And I was having anxiety over a decision because it's not only a decision that's going to affect me, but it's a decision that's going to affect everyone else. And I was finding some stress and anxiety in my life. And when I brought it to the Lord in prayer, how many of you took the 7-day challenge this week and you turned your anxieties into prayers? When I did that, the Lord spoke to me. And he said, the reason you're anxious about this is because you're worried about you, but it doesn't have to do with you. It's going to affect you, but it's not about you. And he showed me that the reason that I was anxious about it was because if I made the wrong decision, I was worried about what that was going to do to the credibility of me as a leader. And I made it about me, and it's not about me. It's about the decision that the Lord wants. And as soon as I gave that to God, it was like anxiety just lifted off of me. It was like, it's not about me. God, I'm going to give it to you. But many times, watch me, we make decisions alone that we shouldn't make alone. One of the books that's on my shelf, it came out, I think, a few years ago. Craig Rochelle wrote it, Divine Direction. I think once we handed it out to all of our graduates, one of our graduating classes. And Craig says this in the book. He talks about the power of making decisions together rather than making decisions alone. And one of the reasons that we get all anxious is because, we think every decision in our life that we've got to make alone. That's why I love a community. That's why I love church, is that I've got people that are like-minded and have the same values and are following Scripture and the path that God has for them. And it provides such counsel and such wisdom to our lives. And he pointed out the way that they would make decisions often in the early church, in the New Testament. And Acts chapter 15 was one of those places where they had to make decisions. The leaders were making crucial decisions that were not only going to affect them, but were going to affect all of the church. And over again, I want you to notice what it says. It says in Acts chapter 15, verse 22, Notice what it says. Then it seemed good to the apostles and to the elders with the whole church to choose men from among them to send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. Verse 25, it seemed good to us, notice plural, not singular, having become one mind to select men to send you with your beloved Barnabas and Paul. And then he says in verse 28, for it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. Do you notice they're not making decisions alone, but they're relying on the resources that God has provided around us. Can I just be real transparent with you? I hope this doesn't discourage anybody. But one of the things we often do as pastors is we counsel with people. And one of the things that's the most frustrating to me is often when people come to me and they're asking for counsel, it's always after the decision. It's never before. So like, if you come to us and go, do you do pre-marriage counseling? We do pre-marriage counseling if you're not already engaged. If you're already engaged, you've already made a commitment. You know what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to say is often we make decisions alone and then we go seek counsel and wisdom, and we've carried something that I don't believe that we're intended to carry by ourselves. I believe decisions are weighty issues in our life. And if you try to carry them, it's what Peter said. You got to cast that anxiety, that weight off you, because you're carrying something that's too big for you. And the early church learned this. And they said it seemed good to us, but it seemed good to the Holy Spirit. It seemed good to the whole church. It seemed good to the elders. Every decision that I make that I include others in is less stressful than the ones I make all by myself. Now, I've made a lot of decisions in life. I've made wrong decisions. I've made decisions that have got me off, the wrong course. I've made really good decisions. I've had to make decisions in crisis. I think over the last year, I've learned things about making decisions as we went through the craziest year of life that have helped me. And you say, what are some practical things if I'm making a decision in my life right now that I need to think about? What do I need to think about? And there's a few things. Number one, I would say this: limit your options. Okay, you have control over that. Limit your options because you will have choice fatigue if you try to make decisions that have lots of options. And again, this is where you need the help of others sometimes to narrow some things off and narrow some things down so you're not facing something that seems so big and so overwhelming. Another thing is to avoid decision fatigue. There is a right time to make a decision and a wrong time to make a decision. How many of you parents have ever been in one of those rants that the psalmist David was in? And your kids come up to you in the midst of that and they ask you a question. That can either be a good thing or a bad thing. Because there are times where I have been so stressed out and my boys have come and asked me a decision, and it was like, I never heard them. I just said no. It's no. I don't want to deal with it. It is what it is. And other times I said yes. But I said yes when they said, Dad, can we borrow the car? And I said yes. And then I realized they're only 12. Because I was fatigued. I wasn't ready to make a decision in my life. There's a right time and a wrong time. And people are under decision fatigue today. One of the things I learned years ago that has helped me tremendously, this has been a game changer for me. I'm a list guy. At all times, on one of my yellow pads or one of my sticky notes, I have a to-do list and a to-decide list. Because I'm always doing something, but I'm always deciding something at the same time. Here's the thing. If you just have a to-do list, you'll forget about the important decisions of your life. And many times, when I answer the to-decide list, it generates my to-do list. So that I target the things that are most important and I don't get lost in all of the details of life. Sometimes I just get lost in the to-do list and I forget that the most important thing I need to be doing in that moment is a decision, not a duty. That's helped tremendously. To make a decision. Listen to me. There are times in life that you're going to have to make a decision because it seems good to you. If you wait to have 100% clarity, you're probably too late in a lot of decisions. And you say, oh, but what if I get off course? I love Romans 8:28. It brings such peace into my life that God works in all things. God has a way of turning things that we've even taken a wrong turn, a wrong decision, a wrong whatever. He works all things together for our good if we're called according to his purpose. There are times that I thank God that I made a wrong decision because it actually got me further than the indecision that I was in. Listen, don't let anybody fool you. Indecision is a decision. Indecision is your decision. And when you're a person that struggles with indecision, you lose your credibility with others and you lose opportunities. That's why it's important. That's why you've got to learn how to do this and got to learn how to do it well, because you don't want to get in your life and look back and go, I missed it because I made a decision. My decision was indecision. And I'm aware that there are so many people right now that are making decisions. I'm making decisions. And I'm being real transparent with you. I don't know what the answers are, but I have to make a decision. And at times I feel the anxiety and the worry and the stress. And so not only do I need to apply the antidote of anxiety, I've got to learn how to shift those and turn those and let them come out rather than suppressing them. But I've got to know that I know that I know that whatever decision, whatever path that I take, that God is with me. Paul said, rejoice in the Lord at all times. I'll say it again, rejoice. Let it be evident that the Lord is near, meaning he's with you. Paul could have thought to himself, I must have made a wrong decision. He wanted to go to Rome to preach, but he's there as a prisoner. He could have thought the same thing. I guess I made a wrong decision somewhere. In Philippians chapter 1, he said, actually, what has happened to me has actually turned out for good because it's advancing the gospel, Philippians 1:12. So he said, God even turned the situation around. So don't get caught in indecision in your life. God is leading. Listen, you don't go in and out of the will of God like a bouncing ball. God is near and he loves you and he wants to help you, and we want to release that off of you. So would you stand right now to your feet? I was thinking about this as we close. And, there was one time in Mark chapter 4 where the disciples were in a moment of anxiety and stress. Mark chapter 4 says they were in a boat, they were crossing the Sea of Galilee, and a storm came up. And it says they were freaked out. And it says there in verse 38, Jesus was sleeping in the boat, and the disciples woke Jesus up in a moment of panic and said, don't you care that we're all about to drown? Notice that in a moment of anxiety and worry, the disciples didn't do the antidote for anxiety, all right? They responded in pure panic, no prayer, wake Jesus up, bail us out. This is how a lot of us deal with anxiety and worry. Do you know this whole situation flipped? I've never seen this before until I was reading the text for Easter and I saw it. Mark chapter 4. Now Jesus is in a moment of anxiety and stress in the garden. He doesn't go alone because Jesus wasn't going to make that decision alone. Think of it. Jesus brought not only all of his disciples, but then he took 3 of them all the way further to where he made the decision to go to the cross for you and I. He wasn't alone. That tells me something. But he told the disciples, what? Don't panic, pray. Notice how Jesus is using the antidote. He goes, I'm going to take my anxiety and worry. I'm going to turn it into prayer. I want you guys to pray for me. Jesus comes back, and now who's waking up who? Jesus comes back. He's got to wake up his disciples. He goes, guys, couldn't you pray? I'm in a moment of anxiety and worry. I was hoping that you would pray for me so that could be lifted. Jesus demonstrating the very thing that we're trying to apply to our lives. I know it works. Friends, if Jesus did it, it works. We can do the same thing in our life today. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you that you have the antidote for anxiety. And God, I know there's things on the outside that want to try to control us, and they trigger these things in our life: integrity issues, imbalance issues, indecision issues. And God, I can imagine as we speak all weekend that something's going to resonate in people's hearts and lives. It might be one, it might be all 3. But they're going to see a trigger that's triggering anxiety and worry. And we have a choice in this moment. We can panic or we can pray. We can go alone or we can join with others. And we can find the peace of God supernaturally in a moment where we desperately need you to come over us and to help us and to protect us and to strengthen us and to build trust. And so wherever you're at right now, wherever you are watching online, if you just be honest and say, you know what, here's the trigger, or here are the triggers that are triggering me, and I've got a choice. The good news is we get to choose. Bridgewood, we get to choose to not just deflect this and start blaming everyone else and blaming your circumstances, because that's going to get you nowhere. But why don't we just turn it inward for a moment? Just direct it to your own heart. God, would you just test my mind? Would you test my heart right now in this moment? Is something out of balance? Is something out of alignment? Something not right in my life? God, is there a decision that's weighing me down that I'm stressed and worried about that's triggering this? And so I'm directing it right to the thing I can control, and I'm going to bring it to you. How many of you just be honest and say, Kurt, I'm identifying with one or many of them or all of them right now in my life? Yeah, thank you. We're all on the same journey. So we have an opportunity to turn it to God.
Thank you, Pastor Kurt, for that message of truth today. And I love how God is moving in the hearts and lives of people right here at Bridgewood Church. Right now, there are people's lives who are being freed from anxiety, stress, and worry. You know, church, I can't help but reiterate that peace isn't a lack of adversity. Peace isn't just a feeling that you get. Peace isn't a lack of stress or a problem-free life, but peace is a person, the person of Jesus Christ. You know, the Bible actually says opposite. The Bible says that we will have trouble in this life, but there is a peace that passes all understanding, and that is Jesus. And so, church, today, you can have that peace just by placing your life in His hands, calling out to Him in the midst of your trouble, in the midst of your adversity. So today, if you need freedom from anxiety or stress, or even just wondering what to do in a situation, can I encourage you today to call out to God? If you need somebody to come alongside of you in this season and to be able to pray with you and to just walk this journey of faith along with you, there are multiple ways on the screen right now that you can get in touch with us. And all that we ask is that you would give us the opportunity to walk out this journey of faith with you, to come alongside of you and encourage you in this season of your life. And so would you do that today? As always, I just want to say thank you once again for joining with us here at Bridgewood Online. You can find all of the information on service times, Easter, all of the events and stuff that's coming up at bridgewoodchurch.com/info. So until next week, we love you and we are praying for you throughout this week.